All right. Happy summer, everybody. It's great to be here with my dad, Ted Flanigan. I'm Sierra Flanigan, and this is a special edition of Flanigan's Ecologic podcast, the Clean Energy Crash Course, where we explore new and emerging clean technologies. Today, we're going to talk about the combustion of green hydrogen and what's up with that. I had to wrap my head around this one. I thought green hydrogen, that's the good one, right? But sure enough, the burning of it has a whole other set of consequences. So anyway, we're going to talk about that on the heels of a publication that just came out, a white paper between my dad, Ted Flanigan, EcoMotion, and Climate Resolve, Jonathan Parfrey over there, basically investigating, is there a way to do eco-friendly burning of green hydrogen? So great to be here with you, Dad. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to learn from you.
Well, thanks for hosting the session. It's great to do. I think we've done about 10 of these crash courses. So
I think so, at least.
Yeah. They are all good, and yeah, you teed it up really well. Actually, I was talking to Jonathan Parfrey. He's one of my hiking buddies, and I was talking about the energy future for LA and also for Glendale, where I live. And I was saying, well, if we could get excess wind and solar, excess renewables to electrolyze water and create green hydrogen, wouldn't that be great? We could use that fuel for all sorts of purposes. And he pointed out to me, and I didn't know this, I admit it right up front. He said that, did you know that when you burn hydrogen, whether it's green or whatever color, that when you burn hydrogen, you potentially end up with more nitrogen oxides than you would if you're burning natural gas. And I said, I didn't realize that. I thought if we had green hydrogen in a power plant, whether it's a fuel cell or in combustion, I thought we're cool, we're good. But it's not the case. So he said, he educated me. I said, I need to learn a lot more about that. And together we've written this white paper, and we've had some fantastic expert advice to help us along the way.
So, point of clarification, is NOx a greenhouse gas? Or I know it's not, it's a pollutant, but can you tell us about what criteria pollutants actually mean and how they differ from CO2, and specifically what kind of greenhouse gas impact, or what is the environmental consequences we're dealing with here?
Yeah. There's 6 primary greenhouse gases, and the first 2 are carbon dioxide and methane, and number 3 is NOx, nitrogen oxides, which have a greenhouse gas effect, a global warming effect, or global weirding effect, but also have the unfortunate situation that they form smog, and they create all sorts of these gases get into our environment, and people that suffer from asthma. There's really the major health concerns related to the burning of NOx, not just not only in power plants, but cars, trucks, boilers, ships in the harbor. So yes to greenhouse gas, and yes to criteria pollutants that people are very concerned about and have been shown to be very damaging to human health.
What does a criteria pollutant mean?
Well, I don't know that much about that answer, but I think the Environmental Protection Agency labels something as a criteria pollutant, and then perhaps it's subject to a greater level of regulation than if it didn't have that designation. But it's well proven that there are really damaging effects from nitrogen oxides in our atmosphere.
And how, approximately how potent is this as a greenhouse gas compared to CO2 or methane, which we hear is 40 times more potent than CO2? Like, plastic or paper here?
No, it's a good question. The global warming potential, and CO2 has a global warming potential of 1, and you just said methane or natural gas is around 40. NOx is way higher. 278 is what I've read in the literature. So it has molecule per molecule. It has it packs a really, really major punch. So it's got a serious global warming impact as well.
So is there any point in burning green hydrogen?
Well,
Cut to the chase, even though we've got a whole bunch of questions to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's yes, yes, there is a strong case, and cities like Los Angeles that are taking a leadership position and figuring out how to become carbon free by 2035, 10 years ahead of the state legislation, SB 100, 10 years ahead, and really soon. That's only 10 years off. A completely carbon free power system. Yes, if we can use hydrogen, and especially if we can use green hydrogen, then we can really take care of that 100% goal. We have to control the NOx, and we'll get into that in this discussion.
Okay, of course, that's my big question. What's going on in LA? You said, there's some ambitious goals there, but I understand that the city of LA has these peaker plants that are disproportionately affecting, I assume, environmental justice communities. Or what's all the hype about now? Has nobody really done this exploration before? Or maybe you could give us a little bit more context.
Yeah, and all utilities have peaker plants that they turn on, infrequently, and therefore they often are older technologies, and they may not be as clean as the newer. They aren't as clean as the newer power plants. But in Los Angeles, there's been this study to figure out, and the National Renewable Energy Lab wrote the study, actually a couple different studies, but to figure out how could you become 100% clean energy generator by the year 2035. And so obviously looking at wind and solar, and we have pump storage and putting in, battery energy storage systems, all would be important. But at the end of the day, the authors realize that we probably will need to use hydrogen in Los
Mm.
Angeles. And so one of the power plants, Scattergood, is being refurbished right now and being readied, is the term, hydrogen ready, being ready to be able to burn either a blend of hydrogen or 100% hydrogen in the future. So this has caused a lot of the residents that live in that area, low income areas, which is typical of power plants. It's not fair, but it's the reality. But it has caused the environmental justice movement, I think, quite appropriately, to say, hey, we were expecting you to shut down those power plants, right? That's
Mm.
what we expect. And we're looking forward to not having a power plant chugging away in our backyard. And now you're saying you're going to repower it with hydrogen. And now, if I can just cut to the chase, they've heard this study, we call it the 6X study, that came out of Germany, that some people have definitely refuted, but that says actually you create 6 times as much nitrogen oxides as if you were burning natural gas. So the environmental justice community and some leaders in Los Angeles have raised this flag. I think it's an important flag to raise. And again, the key is, can you mitigate it? And I'm pretty impressed by that whole discussion.
Okay, and because we know that hydrogen is the most plentiful element on the planet, and basically there's just huge potential, right, in seizing it as a fuel source.
Yeah, that's right. You can use it, and you can compress it, or you can liquefy it. I mean, it's hard to do, but all of a sudden, if you can get it from green energy sources like wind and solar, if you can get it from those green sources, and then you're off to the races. It's great. I want to throw one factoid out there, which is that 1 kilogram of hydrogen, or about 2.2 pounds, yields is about the same amount of energy as 1 gallon of gasoline, which
Mm.
weighs 6 pounds. So you can see that it's got this energy density that's really attractive. And again, because you can bottle it, basically, you can't bottle electricity, but if you take your excess electricity and you bottle that, then you can create a fuel that can be used in many ways, to power cars, to power trucks, to power ships, to power planes, and to ultimately power our power system as need be.
So, what is the future of hydrogen? Is that where you see it going? That it's going to be a source for cars and trucks and planes once ideally this NOx issues dealt with?
There's lots of pundits that are taking a shot at that. It seems to me that it will be used in high value applications. Like you don't want to burn it in a power plant all the time. Maybe just during peak periods, but you don't want to burn it all the time. You don't want to use it in boilers that are in buildings or in industries that use just tons of it. So where does it go? I mean, maybe it goes into planes, maybe it goes into trains. The Germans are doing a lot with trains that are hydrogen fueled. Maybe it goes into cars. There are hydrogen powered cars. Maybe it goes into buses. So I think just the high value applications is where we can expect to see it used. Yeah, until its costs come down considerably. If I can just tag on costs. So I mentioned a kilogram earlier. A kilogram of regular hydrogen that's made by, through steam reformation, by stripping it out of natural gas or coal or oil, that costs about $1 or $1.50 per kilogram today. Green hydrogen, which comes from electrolyzing water, zapping water and producing hydrogen and oxygen, costs more like $5 a kilogram. So right now, the green stuff, which I'm an advocate of, is in short supply, and therefore it's in high demand, and there you go. The costs go up. There is something called the hydrogen shot at the U.S. Department of Energy, which is basically, the goal is just like a moonshot, a stretch goal. The goal is to bring down the cost of green hydrogen to $1 a kilogram, from 5 down to 1, in a decade. And then all of a sudden it would start to be used, much, much more in our society.
More widely. And then once it's created, and maybe you want to give our listeners a little bit of a breakdown of the rainbow of hydrogen and what that means. But then there's two kind of paths for the hydrogen. It's the fuel cell or the combustion. Can you clarify those two processes a little bit for me?
Yeah, and then I do want to talk about the colors because it's so colorful. But fuel cells, I think, are the ultimate. So that's when, to me, my vision would be excess wind, probably offshore, coming ashore at very, very low cost, electrolyzing hydrogen, and then that hydrogen being piped to different users, but that would use fuel cells, because a fuel cell is an electrochemical reaction, not a combustion. And we're going to talk about why combustion is bad, but electrochemical reaction where you put in hydrogen and oxygen, and out of the other side come electricity and water and heat, which can be used as well. So the fuel cells are really, really clean burning, or they're not. I use the word burning, and I shouldn't. They're in clean operation, and they don't release any carbon dioxide at all. So that whole, offshore wind turbine to fuel cell, you've got zero carbon, and you've really reached your goal. But the other option, and what Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has said, or the former general manager has said, was that we're going to need to use hydrogen in our power system to meet peak demands. So maybe half a dozen times a year, maybe just for 3 or 4 hours during each one of those peak periods, something like that. I know in Glendale, our peaker plants, we have permits that we can operate them no more than 15% of the time. And so what the city of Los Angeles is looking at is saying, hey, we may need to burn hydrogen, because fuel cells are very expensive. Yes, they're preferable. We've experimented with them. Yes, we know all about them, but we may need to burn hydrogen for those few hours of the year to meet the peak demand. And we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that the emissions are, abated from that.
So for those of us that aren't in California, peaker plants then are more kind of specialized plants that are turned on as needed. It's not like the base load, which would come from something maybe more reliable, as during peak hours, right? When the most use is being drawn from the grid.
Yeah, exactly. Here in Southern California, it's those really, really hot, September, October days where we have our hottest days of the year. It's late on a Thursday afternoon. All industries have been chugging. Everybody's been in the office buildings, and everybody's overheated. And the power system, experiences one of these peaks where, all those baseload power plants, you add them all up, and it ain't enough. So you have to fire up your peaker plants. And your peaker plants are usually, they're rarely used. So they're typically older. They have less pollution control on them. They're more expensive to operate for the utility, but it's just, they need something to get through reliably. And I'm going to cut back to Los Angeles for a second, but Los Angeles is taking this incredible leadership position with clean energy, the city of Los Angeles. And, leaders of the utility who I met with, who helped me with this paper, said, look, we need to keep the lights on. We cannot, when we have peak conditions in 2035 and we're a clean energy utility, we need to keep the lights on. We may need to burn some hydrogen in a combustion turbine, and in order to do that. But you think about the benefits.
Gotcha.
Our whole society is going to electric vehicles, e-mobility. Our whole society everybody's decarbonizing their buildings. All new buildings are all electric. We have these huge benefits of driving down emissions that the utilities are leading. And so, I really appreciate that line that, the responsibility of the utility to keep the lights on. We may need to use some hydrogen, and it can be green hydrogen, but we may need to use some hydrogen in combustion plants on those peak periods.
Gotcha. So it's really, for some people, a life or death situation, right? If you're hooked up to a ventilator, and many of us have heard the brownouts and the blackouts as something that we have to avoid, but it's just this growing demand on the grid. And I hear you that this is the utility's main function
Right,
is to
right.
keep the lights on. So, and I'm hearing you that burning green hydrogen is really sort of more of a desperate measure than kind of a basic, than a preferential use, like the fuel cells. Yeah. Do you want to break down the rainbow?
I think talking about the colors just for a minute is kind of fun, because we've talked about green hydrogen that comes from wind and solar, but I found now that there's a real rainbow of colors. Brown hydrogen comes from coal gasification. Blue hydrogen comes from natural gas, but with carbon capture in the process. There's pink hydrogen that comes from nuclear power. So that would be electricity, electrolyzing water. And then the colors go on: white, turquoise, yellow, gray. There's all these distinctions. But I think what we clearly want in our society, or at least in Flanigan's view of the world, we clearly want green hydrogen. We want to use renewable energy resources that have as low impact as possible on the natural world. And we want to use those to electrolyze water and create green hydrogen, and use that judiciously and strategically in our society. I don't see it replacing boilers, but I do see it having applications in transportation, and as we're talking about in power plants.
Hugely versatile element that we could take better advantage of. So yeah, what's the problem with the burning? I know we talked about this NOx. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, of the dangers of that?
Yeah, and this is all new to me. I mean, this research was really fun to do because I had no idea. But it's quite interesting that when you burn hydrogen, it burns at a much hotter temperature than natural gas. And the problem with that is when you're burning natural gas, the combustion of natural gas is actually bringing in air, and everyone knows this, that nitrogen is 78% of what the air is made up of. And so in a gas power plant or any combustion process, you're pulling air into a flame, and that flame is causing that nitrogen to turn into nitrogen oxide. And that is really the issue. And on traditional power plants, we put up what's called scrubbers. Now they use selective catalytic reduction to capture those NOx. You can capture up to 95% of the NOx. But because the hydrogen burns so hot, that's why, at least in the early research and in the early reporting, that's why people were really concerned, because it was creating more nitrogen oxides than natural gas. So it's what's called an endothermic reaction, where the heat pulls in these materials, but then they form into different gases, and the nitrogen oxides are formed. And so you're taking yes, it's green, so there's no carbon dioxide in it, but you're introducing nitrogen oxide, and potentially greater in a greater amount into the air, which is obviously very unpopular.
And what are the health concerns then related to nitrous oxide that you're aware of?
Yeah, we've spoken of a few, asthma, I think in particular. 150 million Americans live in areas where the air does not meet, national air quality standards. And this
Wow.
is largely from the burning of fossil fuels. It's mostly from cars and buses and ships. Here's an interesting perspective on this whole conversation. In the LA basin, less than 1% of the nitrogen oxide in the air comes from power plants. Less than 1% comes from power plants.
Less than
Where's it?
one. So where is it
Yeah,
coming from?
it's coming from cars, it's coming from trucks, it's coming from industrial boilers, it's coming from ships at port. But again, it's a very, very small fraction. And building on that point that it's a small fraction, remember this huge carbon dioxide and societal benefit that we're getting about shifting to electric vehicles and about electrifying our buildings. So that's being enabled by the same utility that has this responsibility to keep the lights on and to be reliable. So it's a pretty impressive situation.
Yeah, and pretty nasty pollutant. So are there ways to cut NOx?
Yeah, there really are, and I think
You mentioned the screening or the filters.
yeah, I mentioned the scrubbers. And a good way of looking at this is that there's things you can do before the combustion chamber in a power plant, and then after during in the combustion chamber, and then after as well. So
Hmm.
before, what do? I mentioned that hydrogen burns a lot hotter than natural gas. So, but it can also operate with a leaner mix. So the less hydrogen mixed with air can actually cause a lower temperature burn in the combustion chamber. And then you get in the combustion chamber itself. And all these scientists are all working on all these notions of pre-mixing is the term that they use, but they're using to control the flames. And again, that it affects how much nitrogen oxides are
Right.
produced. They're adjusting the spray angle. They're adjusting the spray pressure.
Huh.
They have something called the swirl motion. They have a process called atomization of the droplets. So all of these things are being worked on, and power plants are getting and more clean, which is amazing. And then the third stage is once you get into the smokestack, what we call it, the exhaust, the emissions of the power plant, and that's where you put on these scrubbers. And so the scrubbers are charged, and they select through selective catalytic reduction. They pull out to 95% of the nitrogen oxides out of the emissions. So that's really good. And I learned studying Los Angeles that the South Coast Air Quality Management District has very, very specific requirements for and maximum amounts of nitrogen oxides that you can release into the environment in the LA basin. And it's two parts per million.
Hmm.
And so, okay, well, how are LADWP's other power plants performing? They just retrofitted one of their power plants for natural gas, and they're coming in at 1.4 parts per million or something like that. They're beating the standard, and they're very confident. The engineers there at LADWP are very confident that they can also beat that requirement or that standard when they do burn hydrogen, when they need to burn hydrogen again, just during those peak periods. So there's the whole litany of ways of reducing the nitrogen oxide emissions from even combustion turbines. Again, fuel cells will be better, but even from
Right.
combustion turbines, there's a whole long list of means of making that happen.
And it sounds like LA is taking it pretty seriously.
Yeah, I think best available
Um,
technology is going to go in. Absolutely.
yeah. So, in the white paper, I haven't read it. I did glance it and have more questions than answers for sure. But you're focusing on weighing the costs of the power plant options, right? As in, like, what other alternatives are the power plants exploring given the peaking demand?
Yeah, that's exactly how I was thinking about it when I heard about this. Okay, if there's concern about using combustion turbines that are even powered with green hydrogen, even hydrogen, but then even green hydrogen, what else would they be looking at? And traditionally, peaker plants are natural gas turbines. That's what they are. The
Right.
turbines are the least cost power plant. Yeah, in the white paper, which everyone is welcome to grab from our website, we started looking at the cost of power plants in terms of dollars per kilowatt of power plant capacity. And some of these, simple cycle combustion turbines are, in the 800 range. Now, compare that with fuel cells, which are in the $8,000 range, right? So fuel cells may be 10 times as much, but there are better types of turbines, aeroderivative combustion turbines, simple cycle, $1,600 a kilowatt of capacity. Nuclear is around 8,000. Modular nuclear reactors that are being discussed quite a bit in the news are around $9,000 a kilowatt. So you wouldn't use that as a peaker plant, but this gives you sort of a sense. Putting in a solar system, around $1,500 a kilowatt of capacity, for these big solar systems out in the desert. And then you look at batteries, $1,700 dollars, $1,700 per kilowatt. And that's what's being used a lot now. And proud to say that our utility here in Glendale is putting in a huge battery farm that will basically be there to address our peak demands.
So what's the conclusion? Well, I guess before we go there, has LA responded to your white paper, or, how do you see putting some of the findings from the white paper into practice locally?
Yes, it was great working on this with Jonathan. I think I did the legwork, and but he provided the guidance, and he guided me to, Dr. Jack Brower, who's a professor at the University of California, Irvine, and he's considered, one of the world's leading experts on this topic. And he was kind to give me his time and to give me his perspective that, you need not add more nitrogen oxide than a gas power plant. If you do it right. That is not true that it necessarily causes more emissions of this pesky criteria pollutant. But then I was also introduced to the Power Resources Group at Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I'm not sure exactly what they call that division, but they were just incredibly kind, giving me their time, their perspective, that, they're a world leader, really the eyes of the world, certainly the country. All progressive utilities are going to be looking at LEDWP. How do you go 100% green in 10 years and be 100% green at the generation level, which is amazing, in 10 years? And so I was lucky that staff there reviewed the paper more than twice, I should say. So I had a lot of very, very intelligent people that gave me their perspective. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I do feel like I've seen now. A lot of the landscape here on this whole issue. And if I can just segue to that, what's the bottom line? I really thought that after all of it, I just thought, God, fuel cells really rule the day. I can't wait for the cost of fuel cells to drop, because I think burning anything is got impacts in terms of nitrous oxide. So,
Right.
My recommendation for the city or whomever reads the paper is, keep advocating for fuel cells, keep driving down their costs so that can be the peaker plant of choice, and they can also be used for baseline applications. We may need to burn some green hydrogen at those peak times. We've talked about it. It's been one of the themes of this conversation. We may need to, and I think that's acceptable. If we really need to offset the nitrogen oxides, allow us to take, as a utility sector, allow us to go into the transportation sector and provide some incentives. We could probably, knock off significant amounts of nitrogen oxides at a far lower cost than trying to get to better than 95% in our power plants. Yeah, I came away feeling strongly that green hydrogen certainly has a big role in our future. Again, with
Even the combustion of it.
Even the combustion of it, if properly done, and when you look at the net benefits, of power systems combusting, relatively small amounts or proportions of hydrogen for their power system, when you look at the net benefits, again, I've said this 2 or 3 times, sorry, but just the electrification of mobility has huge, talk about smog and people living near highways and particulates and all of the mess that is caused from our transportation sector, trains and the ships out in the harbor. I mean, all of them are tremendously polluting to our society. And that's where I do believe that's where we need to focus our attention. I'm not saying to take the pressure off of the utilities to do the cleanest job they possibly can. I advocate for that, but there are these perspectives. So it's been really fascinating. I've been very thankful for the opportunity to dig in and have such knowledgeable people educate me. Now I can educate others.
Yeah, well, you've definitely educated me and hopefully our listeners. Actually, I'm sure of that. So thank you, Dad, for doing this investigation, this legwork. It's fascinating, all the nuances and all the developments and the new technologies. So really appreciate your time. And any last words before we close out?
It's nice to tell the story, but it's kind of much, isn't it? I was accused of being a real nerd on this stuff this morning. Sure has been interesting, and thank you, Sierra, for hosting the crash course and asking the questions. And
all right, everybody. Well, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to being with you soon enough.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.